Each of these carers is being forced to pay back, in some cases, up to £20,000 to the government because they say the Department for Work and Pensions has overpaid them the carers allowance. Tonight, how's it happened and what impact is it having on them? The carers with us this evening are from right across the country. We're also going to hear live from the leader of the Liberal Democrats, Sir Ed Davey, who's a carer himself for his teenage son and was, as a boy, looking after his mum who had cancer. He's called for the debts carers owe to be written off. We'll hear too from Dan White from Disability Rights UK and the chair of the Work and Pensions Committee, Labour MP Sir Stephen Timms, plus Ian Mansfield from the centre-right think tank Policy Exchange. Good evening. 5 years ago, ministers promised to address the problem of overpayments through new technology. So why are so many carers still falling foul of the rules? There are over 5 million unpaid carers in England and Wales. You may be one yourself. They provide care for a friend or family member with an illness, disability, a mental health problem or an addiction. And they're entitled to claim carers allowance of £81.90 a week. You can do paid work and still claim it, but there is an earnings limit. And if you breach that limit, even by 1 penny, you will lose the entire payment. Now, some unpaid carers are being asked to pay back money in overpayments after they say they accidentally breached that earnings limit. And Newsnight has discovered that in some cases, it's nothing to do with earnings, it's actually about carers allowance clashing with other benefits. The Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, was recently asked about this by The Guardian, who've done a lot of reporting on this issue in recent weeks.
It's been a long-standing principle in the way that carers allowance works, which is not means tested, but is subject to an earnings threshold, that people are asked to declare their earnings at the time that they're making those claims, and those are later verified. Now, without getting to the details of anyone's individual claim, that's been a long-standing practice where people, as I said, have to declare their earnings. Those are later checked later on down the line by DWP, and if there's a discrepancy that impacts people's entitlement, then obviously they will seek to recover that and do that in a sensible, fair way, making sure that there's a repayment plan in place if people have not declared their earnings accurately in the first place.
If you are an unpaid carer and are being asked to pay back money, let us know this evening. Send us a WhatsApp 07977 701 980. Let's introduce our carers then. Diane Marchants in Glasgow. She cares for her 26-year-old autistic son, Fraser. She was told by the DWP she owes £20,000 and is paying back £10 a month. The National Audit Office has estimated that a £20,000 debt would take 34 years to repay. Nessie King is in Norfolk. She cares for her adult son, Jamie, who has autism, severe physical disabilities and a condition which means he can't walk. Nessie herself is visually impaired. She says she was told she was fraudulently claiming carers allowance and owes the DWP £11,000. Amanda Hunter is from Cambridgeshire. She was looking after her mum and receiving carers allowance, which was offset against her universal credit and her mum's pension credit. That resulted in them being £300 a month worse off. So, unsurprisingly, Amanda asked the DWP to stop paying carers allowance. They didn't. And now Amanda has to repay £1,240. Connor and Ray Thackeray are from Cheshire. Connor cares for Ray, who's been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder and chronic fatigue syndrome. He was told he needed to pay back just under £400, and he's done that. Elizabeth Tate is from Surrey. She's been a carer for over 20 years, first for her husband David, who died in 2018. Now she looks after her 20-year-old son Oliver, who has Down syndrome and complex needs. Elizabeth was told she owed £1,623, which she has repaid. And I want to say, first of all, welcome all of you, and thank you so much, because I am totally aware of the overwhelming caring responsibilities you all have. So to give us the time and the space this evening is very much appreciated. So thank you. I'm going to ask you all the same question to start with. And Dan, if I can begin with you in Glasgow. When you first found out you owed £20,000, what was your initial reaction? What impact did it have on you?
I just thought, how am I ever going to pay that much money back? I work part-time, and I've only ever worked part-time so that I could look after my son. So it was a shock, to say the least.
And did you wonder how they'd reach this figure?
Yeah, I couldn't figure out how. The only thing was I worked for the council part-time, but what had happened was now and again they would say that they were backdating money that was owed, and obviously because I hadn't told carers that I had received the money at different times, they said that affected the money I was getting for carers. And obviously then when they looked back, they said they don't tell you what you're over, but they did say to me that when they had looked, it was over £20,000.
Right. You worked part-time, as I understand it, Dan, as a dinner lady. So this must, when you went slightly over the threshold, it must have been going on for years. The overpayments were stacking up, were they?
Yeah, I never knew a thing about it, no.
Okay.
Till I got the phone call, that was it.
Nessie, what about yourself? How did you react when you were told you owed money?
Well, I was very surprised because my overpayment came not because I was working, but because I was applying for disability benefits for my own disability. And unfortunately at the time, the DWP said there was no mechanism to enable me with support to fill in the forms. And because I live in a very rural part of Norfolk, there wasn't any support that I could access. So I went over the allotted time limits for filling in the forms. And they said, right, that's it, you've got to, well, eventually, they said you've got to repay 4 years of benefits.
And how did you react, Nessie?
I basically lost my income for 3 years. They've made me pay back £11.55 a week, and I don't understand why, because my disability benefit, when I was able to get support, was reinstated, and I was still caring. People don't really understand that disability benefit isn't just predicated on the hours of care that you provide, but it's also predicated on the level of disability that the person you're caring for actually receives. So if they don't get a certain level of benefit, you're not entitled to even claim carer's allowance. And all of those benchmarks were unchanged. I didn't understand why this overpayment was levied against me.
Thank you for the moment, Nessie. Connor, Ray, welcome. Thank you for making the effort to come to the studio from where you live in Cheshire. So you were told you owed just under £400.
Yeah.
What impact did that have on you?
It came as a real blow, and I felt targeted. I felt like I'd done something wrong because I was just so confused. It turned out to be the same case as the other two, actually, because of a backdated payment. They'd worked out how much I was owed based on the time between my claim and the award, but without detailing that this counted as something that was going to take me over an earnings threshold. So the letter landed on my door, and the worst thoughts go through your head. You know, they demanded it to be paid back in larger sums than we could initially afford, and all the worst things going through your head. What if I can't do this? There's always the thing that they say there's threats of prosecution is written on the letter. It's all it was very intimidating.
Which was just before Christmas as well. Just before, we've got 3 children as well, and it's, you know, if it comes to that time of year, it just adds another layer of stress. Especially the amount that they wanted from us at first, which we had to chop down ourselves. You mean they wanted too much per month to be paid back? Yeah, they wanted like over £100 a month to get it cleared within 3 or 4 months, and we were just like, that's not possible. How can we do that? Yeah. So we had to basically beg them and say, you know, can we do 10? You know, so we've only just paid it off. Right.
Elizabeth, what about you?
Well, I had an overpayment of £1,623, which came as a huge shock and was very upsetting. At the time, I was caring for my husband who was unwell, I was caring for a disabled child, and I also have another child. And I had taken on a bit more extra work because financially we were struggling, and I thought, I worked out my finances as I thought was correct, but unfortunately I had made a few errors. I wasn't in the right frame of mind to work these out, and it just caused me a great deal of upset. I have paid every penny back. I do not want to claim benefits I am not entitled to, but the carer's allowance is almost like a trap. It's so complicated, and the criteria, I mean, only being able to earn £151 a week. I can't survive on that.
Amanda, what about you?
Well, I started claiming for carer's allowance about 8 months into my caring. My mother was bedbound, she needed round-the-clock care. And I was under the impression it was not means tested, so I didn't think I had to report it to...
I mean, it's not means tested. It's not means tested, but there is an earnings limit.
Yes, but I didn't realise that I had to then report it to the Universal Credit, because I'd given up work, I'd given up full-time work to care for my mum. And, you know, if it weren't for the fact that the care system is so broken, many families wouldn't have to even do this. But I then started caring for my mother, and I was caring for her between 90 and 120 hours a week. And, you know...
Sorry, 90 to 120 hours a week?
Yes. 3 working weeks, basically. And when I got the letter through the door to say that I owed £1,200 because... Well, what had happened was I had, about a couple of months into receiving the benefit, I suddenly realised that it was not only being taken off my universal credit, but it was also being taken off my mother's pension credit. So I phoned the DWP and I told them, you know, I want this to be cancelled. They didn't cancel it, they sat on that, they did not action it until the October. And I got this bill for £1,200, and it made me feel like a criminal. And it made me... Because it's as if I'd done something wrong, you know, and actually you'd contact them and said, please stop paying the carer's allowance because it's just not worth it. And I said, and the woman I spoke to was extremely rude, and I said, well, you know, it's just not worth it for me. In fact, it's making us £300 worse off a month. So I need it stopped, please. And when I complained, I found out when I got the bill for £1,200, which I think was in the July or August, I phoned them up again and they didn't know anything about the cancellation. Right. They finally cancelled it in October. Okay. My mother still lost all her pension credit. I'm still trying to get that back. Let's talk a little bit with you, if we may, about what you do as carers. Ray, how much does Connor do for you?
Oh, so much.
List it for us.
Well, with 3 children, obviously we've got school runs. I can't get out of bed until 11 o'clock in the morning, so Connor has to do all the school runs in the morning every single day. He does the cleaning around the house because a lot of the time I can't do it. Some days are better than others. Some days I'm in bed, some days I'm on the sofa. Then other days I can have like a little day out with my kids. I can do these little things. Cooking is something that I do try and do because that's just something that I love to do, and we try and fit that in. But other than that, he does almost everything.
If there is such a thing as a typical week for you, Connor, can you describe what that's like?
Every day starts at about 6:15 to prepare the house, and then it will be getting all the children ready for school, then taking them to school, back again. One of them is still at nursery, only part-time, and then I'll try and get as much chores done around the house as possible, and then it will be going and helping Ray get up and get out of bed and start the day. And sometimes that can be just coming downstairs, and that can be the majority of it. And then it would be mainly childcare from there, and trying to give as much quality to what Ray can do as possible. Some days we can get out, some days we can't.
And if Connor wasn't doing this, what impact would that have on you?
I probably wouldn't be here. So,
what do you mean?
A few years ago, I was in a deep hole where I got no help from the NHS. I got nothing. I only had Connor. A lot of that was physical stuff, but I had a lot of mental problems with the BPD. and I was suicidal, and it was hard, but we got through it. But I wouldn't have got through it if it wasn't for Connor. Multiple times over.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that with us and with our audience. Nessie, you look after Jamie, your grown-up son. I wonder, do you think the carer's allowance of just under £82 fairly covers each week the hours you spend caring for him?
No, I mean, look at me, I'm exhausted. I work 19 hours each and every day. I was working till nearly 4 o'clock this morning. I will work till 4 o'clock tonight.
Yeah.
And I have been doing that now year in and year out for 27 years. My son's now 34. He's bedbound. He has high functioning autism, but he can't read or write. I have to provide all his meals. We get no social care. We've got, we live in the middle of nowhere, Norfolk, and our house is in a very poor state of repair. So I have to do everything.
Yeah.
And it's had a very serious toll on my own physical health. My son's 6'2". Lifting a 6'2" man, I'm not a big lady, tall lady, but you know, it's damaged my back. I've got hip problems. I broke my leg. It just takes over your life. There's nothing else but care. The only time I get any kind of break is when I manage to go into town just to get some food, half an hour, maybe twice a week.
Right, so your break is actually when you're doing another job, when you're going shopping?
When I'm shopping,
yeah,
that's my only time away from care, because you're 24/7 caring for someone who needs it.
Yeah.
And I've been told by social services in Norfolk that if they were to bring in care workers to do my job, it would actually cost them over £5,500 because they'd have to provide night care and care through the day 24/7, and that would cost a lot of money.
Sure. So in that
£81 is a great value for the state.
Understood. Let me bring in Seta Davey. I know you know obviously what it's like to be a carer, and you must be able to relate to much of what our guests are saying this evening, Seta Davey.
Victoria, my heart goes out to all your carers who your viewers can see are struggling just to get by. They've made honest mistakes due to a broken, flawed system, and now they're getting dreadfully penalised. It's just wrong. And whether it's ministers or the DWP, people don't seem to understand that carers are exhausted. You heard from Ness just there, looking after her son, how tiring it can be, and they're trying to juggle that and work just to earn a small amount of money to help them get by. The idea that this system is working is just wrong, and if ministers are just listening to what carers are telling them, they've really got to reform the whole system.
Okay, and we're going to talk about whether there is a better way of doing this. I have to say, we have so many messages from you who are watching at home. I'm just going to read a couple for now. Thank you for WhatsApping us. Gareth in Swansea says, my wife Debbie's been asked to pay back over £1,000 because the DWP say she earned above the threshold for 7 months after she received a backdated pay rise from the council. How is a person working as a dinner lady in a primary school supposed to know what's going to happen in national pay negotiations at the start of a financial year? Stu in Fife says, I'm paying 30 quid a month back, which I negotiated down from 65 quid per month for carers allowance overpayments. I have no idea how they calculated it, and it's been more than 2 years now. It's nearly 10% of my monthly income on universal credit. The system is a shambles. Helen in Sheffield says, I've cancelled my allowance and had an email confirming this, but it's still not stopped after 4 months. I can't get through to anyone. Diane in Glasgow, you explained a little bit about why you ended up breaching the earnings limit, working as part-time as a dinner lady, and sometimes you'd earn a little bit more because you did an extra hour or whatever. Did you never wonder why you were essentially still getting the carer's allowance when you'd gone over the limit? or were you not aware of the earnings limit?
To be honest, I wasn't aware that I had went over the limit when I had received like my money owed from the council. And some weeks, you know, that's the last thing you're thinking about, you know, depending on how my son's been or what his behaviour's been like and things like that, or you're stressed about things. The last thing is thinking, well, I've actually went over. I never did any overtime. I only did my part-time hours, and I ended up reducing them to the stage where I thought, I'm going to end up having no hours at all if I keep this up, you know, to try and keep getting carers.
But do you think you are culpable for the overpayments?
I should have been more aware, but it's just you know, life taking over. You know, things happen, and it's not that I was consciously thinking to myself, right, you know, I'm trying to diddle the carers' money out of, you know, keeping that. I was so shocked when they phoned me to say that I owed over £20,000, you know, and I was always honest with them, and I told them, you know, look, I've only ever worked part-time, there's never been a change in circumstance with my son, it's still the same, but I still got the phone call to say that I owed all that money. And
you're paying back, as I understand it, £10 a month?
Yeah, yeah.
Do you know when what year it will be by the time you've paid back 20 grand?
I've cancelled carers now. I don't get carers because I thought it's not worth the hassle. And when I got the phone call, I felt physically sick because I thought, like that other lady said, I felt guilty. I thought, God, I felt as if I was like a criminal, thinking, but I've got this letter from carers, or like after the phone call, you know, saying what all this money that I owed, and I just thought, no, I can't go on like this. So I now don't get carers, but I changed to another job with more hours so that I can pay more back.
Understood.
To get rid of it. Yeah.
And how do you feel about this, Diane?
Just totally stunners you. There's so much going on in your own life with being a carer, and that on top of it is just, it's like this is supposed to help you, and it just makes you physically feel sick because you think it's helping nobody, and you feel like a criminal in the end of it all, and you think, well, if somebody had phoned me up and said, look, you went over, whether it was the last year or whatever, but to come back and say, you know, you owe over £20,000, and by the way, there's a £50 fine because you didn't tell us on top of the £20,000.
We asked for an interview, I should say, with the Work and Pension Secretary, or actually any minister from his department. That request was declined, but the department did give us this statement. Unpaid carers are unsung heroes. Earnings-related overpayments represent 2.1% of the £3.3 billion we spend supporting carers, and claimants have a responsibility to inform us of changes that could impact their award, with safeguards in place to manage repayments while protecting the public purse. Well, Dan White is here from Disability Rights UK. Mr. White, what's your response to that statement from the government?
Well, once again, we're seeing a statement from the government that's effectively like giving themselves a self-congratulatory pat on the back for the work they're doing without actually addressing the real issues that are going on within the care community itself at the moment. We've seen and heard the unbelievable levels of poverty that carers are living in, the unbelievable amounts of money that they're being forced to pay back, money that could be effectively going on supporting the disabled individual that they're living with. So it's very much what I call a wallpaper quote, the wallpapering over the cracks, telling everyone how wonderful they've done. I noticed they actually said in there that they noted the increase in carers allowance they've given over the past 14 years.
Yeah, they say it's gone up by £1,500 if I remember
correctly. Which works
We've increased carers allowance by almost £1,500 since 2010.
Yeah, but if you look specifically at the facts and what carers allowance is, that works out at £2 a week, which is effectively nothing. They're not addressing the real issues here, which is that the system itself isn't fit for purpose. It's very fragmented. It's very threatening. It's very overbearing. The paperwork is just a milestone. And obviously, as a policy and campaigns person, and as a carer myself, I know that for a fact. Okay. So the problem is the system itself needs a complete restructuring.
OK. We'll talk more in a moment and bring in our other guests as well. But let's bring you some facts about the scale of this problem. Here's our economics editor, Ben Chu.
How big in the scheme of things is the problem of carers' allowance overpayments? Let's examine the numbers. This year, the total cost of this benefit is expected to rise to around £4.2 billion. Though there are a lot more carers today than in the past, this year there are expected to be 1.3 million eligible claimants. The Department for Work and Pensions says its statistics point to a 5.2% overpayment rate for carers' allowance. That suggests around £218 million of overpayments this year. Are these big numbers? Well, in the context of £290 billion of total annual benefits expenditure by DWP in 2024-25, the carers' allowance accounts for around 1.4% of that. As you can see, it's dwarfed by the state pension and universal credit. And estimated carers' allowance overpayments of £218 million would represent just 0.08% of the total. But it's probably more appropriate to look at carers' allowance overpayments as a share of all benefits overpayments rather than all benefits. Last year, that was estimated at around £8.3 billion. So the £218 million a year estimated carers' allowance overpayments would represent around 2.5% of total benefit overpayments. But is the evidence of a particular fraud problem with carers' allowance overpayments there as opposed to mistakes? Is a hard line needed from the DWP for deterrence purposes? DWP estimates that around 60% of overpayments are due to fraud, though the National Audit Office in 2019 expressed some scepticism about these calculations and noted that less than 10% of carers' allowance overpayments were referred to the Crown Prosecution Service for prosecution or led to an administrative penalty. There's some broader relevant context here as well. The most recent census suggested around 5.7 million unpaid carers in the UK, far more than are eligible for carers' allowance. And according to research by the Centre for Care, unpaid carers in England and Wales created economic value of around £162 billion last year, based on what it would cost us to provide all those hours of care privately.
Thanks, Ben. Thank you for your WhatsApps as well. Angie in Oxfordshire says, I was overpaid £5,000 and had to declare myself bankrupt because I couldn't afford to pay it back. Kevin says, I started caring for my partner who's disabled. They overpaid me £4,328 and they want that back. Still with us, leader of the Liberal Democrats, Sir Ed Davey, who is a carer himself for his teenage son, and he was a carer as a boy, looking after his mum who had cancer. We have Chair of the Work and Pensions Select Committee, Labour MP Sir Stephen Timms, plus Ian Mansfield from the centre-right think tank Policy Exchange, and we've got Dan White still with us as well from Disability Rights UK. So Ed Davey, you heard Ben say there have been something like £280 million in overpayments of carers' allowance. The government say they need to claw back that money to protect the public purse. You were part of this government once. Isn't it important to claw that money back?
No, I think it has to be written off. And let's just stand back a minute, Victoria. Let's remember what these carers are doing. They are doing the most amazing job under extremely difficult circumstances. They're propping up the care system. And if we reflect on the importance of the care system for our NHS, they're actually propping up the NHS as well. And what I think we should be doing in this debate is not just looking at these amounts of money you're talking about, actually looking at it in the context of reforming our NHS. We need to get behind family carers and social care to transform our NHS, and we do that by valuing our carers first of all, rather than penalising them. We don't need to just write off this debt. What we need to do is reform the whole system.
Sure, but let's talk about the writing off which you are calling for. What about those carers that did inform the DWP they had gone over the earnings limit? What about those like Elizabeth who've already paid the money back?
Well, that would need to be looked at a review that I'm also calling for. But the idea that people who are on very, very low incomes can have this money clawed back, you know, one of your examples, I think it was Ness, over 30 years. I mean, it's completely absurd. These people are doing a fantastic job. They're already struggling to get by. The idea that they should pay this back almost forever and a day is just wrong. And let's remember, the DWP was told about this problem 5 years ago. The Select Committee warned them, and the government promised to put it right. The government said that they were going to use new technology so they'd be able to warn carers, getting carers allowance that they had overshot their earnings limit, and therefore they make a correction. The DWP failed to do that. So it's government failure, not the honest mistakes by carers, and that's another reason why the debt should be written off, so we can get this on a proper footing, reform the whole system, and value carers so we see their work in the context of reforming our NHS.
Ian Mansfield from Policy Exchange, do you agree with Sir Ed Davey that the debt should be written off?
I'd say there should be a lot more compassion in the system than there is currently. I wouldn't go as far as a full write-off, because actually we do need to protect public money, and actually we need to distinguish between the small number of people who may have set out to commit fraud. I sort of figure out that it might be around 10%, and the much larger number, such as those we've heard from tonight, who've made honest mistakes, or who actually have informed the government, and then the government hasn't come back to them and hasn't implemented that.
Do you accept that, Dan White?
Well, I'm thinking along the lines of these are carers who are given it all every day. They're not accountants by nature, they're carers. They're not hiding money in offshore accounts. They're not high earners who are avoiding paying tax. And I agree with Ed that the debt should absolutely be written off, because this is actually part of the DWP fault. All these carers should have all these debts written off straight away, because they are saving the country a huge amount of money every year.
Do you accept it is the responsibility of the DWP in Mansfield? Because, as Sir Ed Davey pointed out, actually it should never happen, because benefit staff get automatic alerts from HMRC if a carer's allowance claimant is earning too much. So the DWP has the ability to prevent overpayments.
So I think absolutely we should be looking at where the balance of fault lies, and in some cases it does seem that it was on the DWP. But what I would say as well is I'd like to use this as an opportunity that we can actually look at the carer's allowance in more detail going forward, because it's clear it's not fit for purpose in terms of making work pay, particularly when you look at that cliff edge. There's no tapering, and what we've heard from tonight, we've heard from a lot of people who want to do the right thing. They want to earn, they don't want to just be dependent on the state, and actually they shouldn't be penalised for it by going just 1 penny over the threshold, and the whole lot gets written off.
Yeah. What about all the other billions of pounds that is wasted by the government or is lost to fraud, which they don't recover? The NAO in March last year reported that HMRC recovered £762 million out of an estimated £4.5 billion of fraud and error in its COVID support loans and schemes. HMRC expects to recover just over £1 billion, which essentially means £3.4 billion will not be recovered, and so is a de facto write-off. I mean, that's a massive amount of money. This is £218 million.
The Policy Exchange, we actually wrote a report in 2020. We estimated at £4.6 billion of fraud from COVID, and actually we said that absolutely should be gone after.
Well, they're only going to get, HMRC reckons, about £1 billion.
Well, I think the broad thing here is that we need to be looking at fraud across the piece. But what we've heard tonight, we're not mainly talking about fraud here. We're talking about a highly complex system with multiple interacting benefits. The reason I don't support the complete write-off is because actually that would set a very bad precedent for elsewhere.
Okay,
but when we're
let's bring in.
case,
Sorry, I didn't mean to stop you in the middle of a sentence.
I would say on a case-by-case basis, we'll allow a nuanced and a much more compassionate approach than what we see now.
This is Stephen Timms, Labour MP, here as Chair of the Work and Pensions Select Committee. 5 years ago, the then Work and Pensions Select Committee highlighted these problems and said more staff were needed in order to alert carers to overpayments. It's clearly still happening. Why?
Well, the department hasn't done what it said it would do. I think the key is those alerts that you mentioned. The department is told every single month when somebody goes over the earnings limit. The minimum they should do is tell the carers that they've had this information and there is a question about whether they're entitled to the benefit. The people we've heard from this evening never heard anything until they had a £20,000 debt. That's completely unnecessary. The department must focus on doing its job properly. A lot of these alerts that it receives, it completely ignores. I think every single time they get one of those alerts, they should alert the carer to the situation that they're in.
So why don't they? Why is it still happening?
Well, it may be because they haven't got enough people. It may be that because they don't bother. I don't know. But it was, as you say, raised 5 years ago. There doesn't really seem to be an improvement in the 5 years since then. Today, actually, they have said they're going to experiment with notifying people every time. It's 5 years too late, but maybe it's a case of better late than never. They need to get on with not just experimenting, but actually doing that routinely.
Do you agree with Sir Ed Davey of the Liberal Democrats that the debts should be written off?
No, I think there's a real legal problem about a large-scale write-off in these circumstances. I think the focus must be on stopping the overpayments happening in the first place, and they could readily do that given the information they've already got.
Right, so even someone like Diane, who is told she owes £20,000, or Nessie, who's told she owes £11,000, it's going to take them decades potentially to pay that money back, and they say it was not.
Yeah,
it's down to a complex system.
The department is able to write off debts in certain tightly defined circumstances, and it may be those circumstances apply in one or two of these cases, but to suggest that writing them all off is going to solve the problem, it won't. We've got to stop them happening in the first place.
OK, so you're not calling on a potential Labour government to write off these debts?
No,
okay.
I think we need to get the system working properly.
So how do you get it? What's the better way to do it? What would you all say?
Well, I think we all agree the system isn't working. That's the main thing. It's far too fragmented. Pieces don't talk to each other, don't form a jigsaw. That's the main thing. But I keep coming back to this, and I agree that the debts as they are stand now have to be written off, and we have to start again. The problem is no government seems to want to touch the DWP to go into it. They tried to have a dabble at social care under Boris Johnson. That's been picked apart as well. We really need to have a think where we are as a society, empathy-wise, how we focus getting money back off people, because we're trying to get it back off, I don't like using the word vulnerable, but off the most vulnerable people in society who are basically trying to keep people alive on a daily basis. The money that these people are paying back could be easily going towards things, and a cost of living crisis, remember, we're still in it.
Okay.
Carers and disabled people are still paying over the odds for heating, for food, for medication and stuff like that. So there's a moral argument here to write this off in the middle of a cost of living crisis.
Let me read this message from Andrew in London. My 85-year-old mum has been told that she is £13,000 in debt for not declaring that her son, me, Andrew, has been receiving carers allowance of £185 per month for the past 4 years. My mum is completely bedbound and has dementia. I care for her 24/7. Sir Ed Davey, what would be a better system?
Well, first of all, we've got to get rid of this completely crazy system that as soon as you earn a penny over the earnings limit of £151 a week, you have to pay back the whole of the carer's allowance. That cliff edge approach is complete nonsense. And, you know, I earlier made the argument, Victoria, that we need the reform to sort the care system and the NHS system out together. But we also need to make sure that carers are able to work and feel confident to work. And the way the system is operating at the moment is not only creating all these massive problems, but it's a massive disincentive to work. We should be encouraging these people to work. The system is working in a perverse way. There needs to be a major reform of it.
OK. I want to ask our carers, if the Prime Minister was watching right now, Connor, what would you say to him?
Well, I'd actually like to second some of the stuff that Dan was saying about the fragmentation of the system, because one of the huge problems that I had when we were trying to deal with this issue was that none of the departments, the DWP, Universal Credit, and then debt management, who are the people that take the money off you, they refuse to talk to each other, and the communication between them is absolutely appalling. I'd also point out, in terms of wiping off the debt, 280 million sounds like a very big number, but in the grand scheme of things, especially when you compare it to other things, like the amount that carers are saving, 162 billion a year, the annual budget of the NHS almost, which works out as about 445 million a day. I think we can afford to let that one go for the sake of some of the stories we've heard, like Nessie and everyone else here, and Diane, heartbreaking. They do not deserve to be going through this on top of everything else.
What would you say if the Prime Minister was watching Newsnight right now and you could talk to him directly? Briefly, Amanda, what would you say to him?
I would say that if the state wants people to be caring for their loved ones at home, and they have to because the system is so broken, they need to stop persecuting those who do. There needs to be a revolution in the social care sector, an absolute revolution.
What would you say, Ray? Your message to the government and whoever wins the next election?
There needs to be more help. It gets overlooked all the time. Disabilities, carers, even PIP, that needs looking at as well. All of it. It's just we need help. We can't do this on our own.
I'd like to say I'm not on any benefits. I'm a carer. I want to know how I can work and care, because something is going, and at the moment I'm not able to take my son to his appointments because I'm working. What do you want me to do?
Diane, briefly, your final message?
I would just like to say that, like everyone else, try and make things easier for us, for the carers, because it's hard enough without having to worry about other things on top of that as well.
Okay. And Nessie, I think your picture's just gone a bit dark, but very, very briefly, what would you say, quickly?
Very quickly, I agree with Sir Ed Davey. There needs to be a root and branch reform of carers allowance and all the other linked benefits. If we lose our carers allowance, we lose our housing benefit. We're homeless. It's not just about the money. It's devastating across the board for both carer and caree, and it really, really needs to be looked at. It's punitive.
Okay. Thank you all very much. Particularly to Diane and Nessie and Connor and Ray and Amanda and Elizabeth, but also Dan White and Stephen Timms and Sir Ed Davey and Ian Mansfield. Really appreciate your time and making the effort, because it is, I know it's a monumental effort, so very, very grateful for you talking to the nation. It goes without saying, if you have an experience to share on this issue or any other, do get in touch with me. I'm at Vic Derbyshire on TikTok, X and Instagram. Our email address is newsnight@bbc.co.uk. Thanks for watching. I'm back tomorrow. See you then.